Alright guys, in today's video we're working on an oldie but a goodie. This is an IBM Thinkpad G40. It's one of the machines I use in the shop to run software that can only run on Windows XP. And if we fire it up, you can see that we got a problem up here on the screen. Just wait for it to post up here. She's slow. Give her a moment. Put in our passcode. And then what we're going to find out is she's got a fan error. You can see this error here, fan error. So we're going to have to replace the fan. And I'm going to go through doing that today. All right, let's take a look at the hardware maintenance service manual from IBM for this computer from July 2005. This is for the G40 and the G41. And we're going to go over here to replacing a field replaceable unit, or FRU. And we're going to look at replacing the fan assembly. And we can see we're going to have to knock out the battery pack, the DIMM door, the keyboard, the middle cover, the hinge cover, and the LCD and bezel assembly. Battery pack is probably pretty straightforward. I'll just show you this here. So this comes right off, a little clasp. I'll show this on video in just a second. I think that completes that part. Yep. We go back over here, the DIMM door, screwdriver, Phillips, a couple of screws. It peels backwards. Right? They say to loosen the screws, but do not remove them. It's a captive screw. All right, and that completes that section. And then if we go back again, the keyboard, so we've got two more Phillips screws, one here and one here. Those we will remove. And then we'll be able to lift up the keyboard on the other side. They're indicating here in step 2, push the keyboard from the bottom the way you see, while at the same time pushing a little in the direction of the arrow in step 3. Right, so you're going to lift up and push towards the LCD panel. Take care not to bend the keyboard when lifting it up the rest of the way, and the final step 4. So we'll show that, and that will lift it up where you can expose the ribbon connector to pull it straight up and disconnect it. All right, there's that. And then the middle cover, single screw. So we're going to remove this single screw indicated by 1 here. And then that'll allow us to peel this cover off the other side. It says the bottom side screw that secures the middle cover may be a security or tamper-proof screw for models that had 802.11a or b. So we might need other than a Phillips on some models to do this. And then the hinge cover. So on this guy, they're just telling us this little plastic piece. We're going to push it with our finger, push it towards the back, and you're going to cause it to cock out like that. Let me see if I can open this up a little bit. It's going to cock out a little bit, and then you'll be able to push up on that piece that's cocked out, and it'll come off. When installing, they're reminding you when you reverse this to align the hinge cover squarely, and you push this guy down. It's basically going to be the reverse of this, and we'll show that too when we get the thing repaired. All right, and the last one I'll show you from the service manual is the LCD and keyboard bezel. 2 more screws in the rear, right here. Those come off. With those removed, then we'll be able to disconnect these 2 lines here and these 2 lines here. There's a close-up of these harnesses. Different wiring harnesses that need to come off. And then we'll remove these screws, these 6 here in step 4, and then these 3 large and 1 small in step 5, right? So there's a total of 9. One of them is silver, the other is black. So I should say there's a total of 9 black ones and 1 silver one for a total of 10. With those removed, we'll be able to peel this cover all the way back. And that'll be the last piece of disassembly that'll get us in a position where we can remove the fan. They're telling you to make sure the red band on the LCD cable remains aligned with the corner of the keyboard bezel under the hinge. I think that's it for this step. Yep. All right, so let's get started. So we're going to start, I'm going to move this out of the way. We'll bring the computer over and we're going to start doing these pieces with the battery pack. Battery pack removal. There's a locking piece here like we saw in the service manual. It's currently in the lock position. We want to move it to the unlock position, and when we hold it like that, the battery comes out. All right, DIMM door, 2 captive screws. Phillips. I'm going to loosen both of these. That'll allow us to remove the door, exposing the two memory DIMMs. All right, keyboard. Here and here, you can even see IBM put an impression in the plastic of keyboard to indicate these two particular screws. So we'll remove these two Phillips screws as well. There's one. There's two. With those two out, we can flip the unit around. We can open the screen. And with those screws removed, we can lift up the keyboard. We're going to slide it out from under the forward bezel, like so. And just like the service manual indicated, we're going to peel it back to where we can get access to removing this connector. Just trying to see if it is wedged under something here before we can lift it off, and it is. If I peel it back this way, we can see it's naturally, it wasn't shown in the service manual that it's kind of wedged under the plastic here. All right, guys, I don't know, for some reason this model doesn't match the service manual, and there's no way for us to get this connector off because the retainer is part of the outside plastic housing. So let's just keep going, and maybe a path will reveal itself to us. Let's go ahead and remove this middle cover. So this middle cover, if we just close this back up for a moment, was held on by a single screw, which I believe is right here. So we'll take this screw off here, and that should allow us to flip this back over again, open it back up, get this keyboard out of the way, and then we should be able to release this middle cover. It's old plastic, so I'm trying to go slow so we don't damage anything. There we go. So that piece is off without anything getting broken. And now those connectors, most of them, are exposed. We're almost to our fans. This is the CPU. This is the main fan to the CPU. All right, so the hinge cover. So what they showed us on the hinge cover is we push this with our finger and it moves like that, you see? And we're going to have to deal with this keyboard that we were not able to remove. If we get this guy at an angle here, we're going to have to get like a spudger tool down here probably to pick it up. Oh no, I got it with my finger, surprisingly. All right, so the hinge cover is off, and it didn't break either. Fantastic. All right, now for the LCD and keyboard bezel. So we'll take this screw here on the outboard side. For some reason, this guy is really tight. Some of these screws probably have thread locker from the factory, and if they've never been off, they're going to be really tight. And that's the case. What this one is probably, yep, you can see the blue, a little bit of blue on there from the original thread locker. All right, that one, and then all the way over on this side is one just like it. This one's not so tight. All right, and then the service manual told us after we did this that we were supposed to be able to get in here and remove some connectors. But this model we have here continues to be a little different. So we can see routing for these wires is underneath this kind of cooling piece. Now maybe we can get this out. Maybe I can see more of those connections. So we can see where, we just cannot get our keyboard out because the connector is right under here and held in by this piece here. But we can disconnect this, and we can disconnect this. And we can disconnect this. And I believe that is all they want us to do here. On this one, we've already got one repair to do because this connector actually let go of the surface mount solder here. That's how old it is. We did not want the whole connector to come off. I'll have to go touch that up and repair that. Unfortunately, that's the problem with working on these old computers. All right, but there's that cable all out the way they want us to do. Now we're going to go take the 10 bolts off the bottom. All right, let's get the little one that's down here first. Okay, little teeny one. And then starting here, we'll remove the other 9. So here's 1, 2, 3, 'Come on out of there. All right, we'll have to get a magnet and pull that one out. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. And then finally 9. So let's see what this did for us. Okay, this should have us where we can separate off now this bezel piece. At least I think. Let's take a look at our service manual one time, make sure. And it says, yeah, you should peel this back. It should just peel off. All right, so other than the fact that we have the keyboard still connected, I think that's the only thing that we're stuck with here. Unfortunately, right? So we have that problem because of the difference in the service manual. See if we can just work this out of here. Okay, perfect. So now with this out of the way, the service manual kind of instructions were just a little bit out of order. You really can't remove this keyboard until you remove this bezel, because this bezel has got this lip right here that's pushing against that connector. So interesting. All right, now we got access to the fan. All right, finally we can continue. Now we got through all of this. Now they show you a picture here. They say to prevent the CPU from being pulled from the socket when the fan's removed, remove the screw in position 2 and reinsert it into position 3. Then carefully turn the screw to separate the fan from the CPU as you lift up. And they show you this position here, moving it from here to over there. It's not going to go down all the way. Do not crank it down all the way or you'll damage the CPU. And then we're going to remove these captive tension screws in these positions shown in 1, and then we'll be able to lift it out. There are 4 of them. So let's get going on that. Right, so we got this set up here. So if you didn't already unplug this like I did at the beginning, you can do that now. And actually, let me show you a couple of things. So we had a couple of little small damage things, right? So this little connector came off, and I'm just showing you guys there's no damage to the connector, and there's no damage to the board. This is just a poor cold solder joint, if you will. So we're just going to be able to resurface mount this where it belongs right there, and I'll show you that towards the end of the video. That's very simple repair. The other thing you might have caught was keycap popped off in this position here. So that's not too bad. There's a couple of little clasps here and also on the other side. And we just got to get them to fit underneath both sides of this little hinge. That's already fixed right there, so no big deal. All right, let's get going on this now. So this is the position of screw 2 that they were referring to, so we're going to take this guy out. And you can't miss it because it's the only round head screw. All the other ones are flat. And then we're going to position it here. We're just going to leave it like that for now. First, we're going to take the tension off these 4 retaining spring bolts here. 1, 2, 3, make sure they're all the way off. And then the last one is back here. All right. All right, so now we've gotten it kind of separated from the paste, and we're just slowly turn this screw in until it touches bottom. And with that, we've got one more connection right here, and our fan assembly is out. And unfortunately, our CPU came out of the socket anyway. So looking at the instructions, you know, that should have prevented that, but I guess we didn't tighten down on it enough. That's okay. All we're going to do is kind of wiggle this off. I can see what's happened here is this paste is so old that it's just holding this in place. I'm going to get a plastic spudger tool here, and we're just going to separate that CPU. I think the instructions on the service manual would normally have worked, but this is just so old that the paste has become an adhesive. Yeah, we probably should have just tightened it down just a little bit more, and that would have broken that seal. What we're going to have to do is this CPU lock, we're going to get a flathead. We'll open that up and put it back in. Let me go get a flathead screwdriver. We'll put the CPU back in. We'll clean off the paste, and then we'll be ready to repair the fan. All right, so let's release this. So that we can get this back in the way it's supposed to go. Just checking all these pins. Make sure none of them are bent, because she came out while she was supposed to be locked. Yeah, that's just making sure I had it right. That's unlocked. It's just not sitting in there the way I would like. Ah, my mistake, guys. I had pin 1 in the wrong location. That's why you never force anything. So that's pin 1 up there. Now we can relock this into position of where pin 1 was. All right, so we got that back into place. We're just going to give this a wipe down with some 91% alcohol. Get some of this old paste off that has turned into glue. And we'll repaste it in when we get ready to reinstall it. But we want to get all of this off of there. And I just prefer to keep it installed like we have right now during this cleaning process, so that we don't get any pin damage and we don't accidentally get any kind of static electricity damage. All right, so that CPU is all ready to go. Now we can turn our attention to the unit. So this whole assembly back in the day, There's an IBM field replaceable unit number, FRU number 91P7401. We can double check to see if that has any newer number. We're not going to find this kind of part, I'm pretty sure, but I'll pull the part information on the service manual in the parts list section. So we want is part 21, which is the fan assembly. So the fan assembly, right here, fan assembly. So we've got one number for the 3 gigahertz one, and then one number for everything else. And then there is assembly for F4, and then there's the heatsink itself. So it looks like the 91P8535 is the most recent part number. So there's a couple of different numbers that you could look at there. So 91P7401 was what the factory put in, and then the number I just showed you there. They're not going to be available. Maybe you find one, but you probably pay more money than it's worth. What we're going to do instead is we're going to take this apart and remove these screws. We're going to disassemble this, and we're going to see if we can find a replacement fan that just fits into this housing. All right, guys, so we got this assembly out, and we've got it cleaned up. Now, this is a real heavy-duty piece of gear here because that G40 is running a desktop processor, not a mobile processor, so it took considerable cooling to get it operational. So the G40, this fan is populated here. The G41, this fan is not populated, so that's one obvious difference between the two. Also, the G40 is going to have this Toshiba, I believe is who the manufacturer is here, MCF C01 PCM05 as the cooling fan here. And then this IBM FRU number, 91P8535, that's for the whole assembly, actually. Now, the G41 doesn't have this same type of fan. It's got a little bit of a different setup here where you actually can easily replace the fan, and it's a Panasonic type, and here's one of those. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to read this, but it's like a UDQF2 RH41CQU, it looks like. Now, this is a replacement one. You can still get replacement fans for the G41, and they're just held on with 3 screws, similar to this small fan here. But this fan is very proprietary and customized for IBM. So there's a couple of things. I might end up having to put this thing on and off a couple of times. We took it off, we cleaned it, and we tested the terminals here, and we are getting both of these fans operational. Black is negative, red is positive, and tan is the RPM feedback. And that's the same for both this 3-pin connector and this 3-pin connector. Both of these are 5-volt DC maximum fans. So I tested them with 3.3 volts, and they both spun up. So either it was just clogged up with dust, and we're lucking out, and we just clean it up and put it back together, or the fans are off spec for their RPM, one or the other. I purchased the G41 fan because it's the only one that's around, and it has the same size fins, and it's going to have the same RPM profile, so the BIOS on the G40 will be happy with it. If we find out that this is the bad one, at least I can figure out some way to get it mounted into here. So even if it's just dirty, I'm going to go ahead and further disassemble this because we're going to want to clean it as thoroughly as we can if that was the case, and plus it'll give you guys a view. So when I remove this fan, it'll be how you would see the G41. There's a little piece of foam here. We don't want to tear it up. We need to get this screw out. Unfortunately, it's in the way. It might end up tearing more of that foam off. I think this is fine, though, to get in here and clean this. So we can still see there's a lot of dust up in here. So I'm going to do this kind of fold back to clean this one. Now this guy, his screws are on the other side. Here. Here. Now none of this is in the service manual. What IBM would have had you do back in the day, this is a computer from 2003, so it's 20 years old at the time of this video, they would have just had you replace this entire field replaceable unit, this entire assembly that we're working on. They would not have disassembled it down to a failing component. Now with those screws out, we should be able to remove this Toshiba fan. Again, we're going to damage some of this foam. It's just unavoidable, unfortunately. Looks like it's hung on a piece right there. All right, and so there's that fan. So the blades and everything are identical with the G41. It's just a different design. So what I'm thinking is if this fan turns out to be the problem, and even though it works, it's out of spec RPM-wise, I'm thinking, we have to modify this, but we can drill and tap 3 holes in order to let it mount in place of this one. This one looks like the circuit board is physically glued onto this aluminum assembly. So first we're going to try cleaning everything up even more thoroughly. We're going to put this back together. We're going to reinstall it, partially reassemble the laptop, and see if the problem goes away. If the problem doesn't go away, we'll be able to use this fan plugged in place of this one and see if it is an RPM problem. If it is, we'll take it apart again and we'll go chase that. If it's this small one, we'll also be able to tell that, and then we'll try to find a fan that might fit in here. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to go clean this up and then we'll come back. All right, guys, we got everything reassembled here in terms of our fan assembly. We cleaned everything out, as you can see, very painstakingly. A lot of crud on the fan, and I'm hoping that's all it was just dragging the RPMs down. So now we're going to reinstall this onto the CPU and hope for the best. So we're going to put a little bit of new thermal compound on here. Just a pea-sized amount in the center is sufficient for these old style processors. And then remember, we had this screw in this position here that was used to push the CPU out. We're going to remove that now. Get our wires out of the way. And get all of our screws lined up. Unfortunately, looks like I have to plug this in before I can push down because it's kind of underneath it. Let's try this again. There we go. Now you don't want to scrunch it down on just one side. We're going to get it started on all of these, and then we're going to tighten it evenly all the way around on all 4 of these. It'll stop when it's fully seated. That's it. And we'll take this fan connector and connect it here. We solder back on the one that broke down here. So we're ready to partially reassemble everything else and see if we fix this problem. If not, then I'll show you how we go about figuring out a way to get this fan mounted in place of this one. I'm probably going to drill the holes through the copper and sit it right on top here. All right, guys, looks like in our case it was just cleaning the fans. Make sure that you put your CPU extraction screw back in its holding area and don't leave it in here. You notice in the previous clip we had removed it altogether, but I think I want to point that out. And then make sure the routing of this cable is such that you can get this cooling duct backed in okay with that routing down there, and this sits on top of it. Otherwise it'll kind of bow the keyboard. But if we fire it up here, giving it a couple of tests, and it looks like it's going okay. I'll show you something else that popped up in this. So she's going to come up here in just a moment. Just give her a second. And then when she starts coming up, we're going to go ahead and go into BIOS. And I'm going to show you something that I noticed that popped up on this. So when this first came up, it was running really slow. And what I discovered was the battery backup for the BIOS was shot and needed to be replaced. I'll show you that in a moment as well. And there's well, it's not here. I'm going to remember where I saw this. I think maybe it's here. I don't go into this that often. Yep, down here in memory. This extended memory test says disabled, and it'll say disabled even if you pulled the CMOS backup battery out. The problem is there's a bug in the BIOS, and it's actually enabled by default even though the user interface says it's disabled. So what you want to do if the battery runs out is you want to come in here and enable it, reboot, and then disable it. And what I found is that actually picks up the change and gets you back to having a fast boot. So let me go ahead and get out of this, and I'll show you that battery. But other than this, guys, it turned out that this just needed a thorough cleaning in my case to get that fan error cleared. We didn't have this problem anymore. We didn't have to go modify the heatsink to put in that G41 style fan. So this coming up, I'm just going to hold the power button down to shut it off. Close the lid. We got 3 screws to put back in here to secure all this, and we're going to put this back in. But the piece I wanted to show you real quick here, and I'll put a link in the description for these parts just for your convenience. But if you pop open the memory DIMM door, the battery that controls all this is right here. It's an ML1220. It's not the same as a CR1220, so make sure if you replace this, you put the ML type battery. They're still made by FDK out of Japan, and I'll put a link to that in there as well. But that was something that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what had happened with the boot being so slow. Anyway, guys, we're done. I hope this helps you out. I'll put a link to this little guy here down below in case you need it. There is no replacement out there for the smaller one, so that one you'll have to improvise if that ends up dying on you. But this one at least is compatible. I did plug it in, and the BIOS was happy with the RPM profile of this fan, so it definitely would be a suitable replacement if we weren't able to get it repaired just by cleaning it. If you got any questions, leave them below in the comments, and I'll try to help. If you found this video useful in getting your old classic ThinkPad running again, take a moment to pay it forward, hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.